They laughed when she tied a balloon on top of the house, but when they discovered the reason, Faith Henderson tightened the rope between her wrinkled fingers as she watched the giant balloon sway above the wooden roof. The neighbors pointed and whispered, some laughing openly at the unusual scene. At 72, she had never done anything so strange, but the circumstances had pushed her beyond all limits. 3 days before, the letter from the City Hall had arrived with the final notice. The house where she had lived for almost 50 years would be demolished in a week to make way for a new housing complex. The balloon wasn't madness. It was her last resort to get the attention of someone who had promised to return decades ago. "Mrs. Faith, have you completely lost your mind?" shouted Martha, the neighbor next door, leaning on the gate. Faith pretended not to hear. Her hands trembled not just from age, but from the mix of nervousness and determination that filled her chest. The afternoon wind made the balloon dance, and she needed to keep the rope very tight. "Mom, what on earth is going on here?" The voice came from behind, laden with irritation and surprise. Faith turned slowly and saw Grace, her youngest daughter, standing in the yard with a suitcase in her hand and her eyes wide open. "Grace, you arrived early." "Of course I arrived early. Mrs. Martha called me desperate, saying you were on the roof with a giant balloon. I thought she had gone crazy, but it seems—" Grace dropped the suitcase on the packed dirt ground and climbed the 3 steps of the wooden porch. Her eyes scanned the balloon tied with thick ropes to the roof beams, then returned to her mother's tired face. "An explanation, now." Faith took a deep breath. How to explain 5 decades of waiting to a daughter who grew up without a father? How to talk about a promise that had sustained her sanity all these years? "It's about your father." "My father?" Grace let out a bitter laugh. "Mom, my father left us when I was 3. What is this about? He didn't abandon us. He left to work and promised to return, and he will keep his promise." The silence that followed was broken only by the rustling of the balloon against the wind. Grace watched her mother's face, looking for signs of dementia or confusion, but found only the same stubborn determination she had known since childhood. "Mom, that was over 40 years ago. 47 years, 2 months, and 15 days. The precision of the answer made Grace swallow hard. She approached the chair where her mother was sitting and noticed for the first time how fragile she looked, holding that thick rope in her hands. "And what does the balloon have to do with it?" Faith pointed to the sky with her chin, without letting go of the rope. "Before he left, your father said that if I were ever in real danger in this house, he would send a sign from the sky. Well, the house is being demolished next week. If that's not real danger, I don't know what is. And you think he'll see the balloon and come running to save the day?" "I don't think. I know." The conviction in her mother's voice left Grace speechless. She looked around, noticing for the first time the neighbors gathering outside the gate, some with cell phones in their hands filming the scene. "Mom, people are filming. This is going to become a joke." "Let them laugh. When your father arrives, they'll see who was right." Grace felt her chest tighten. Her mother had always been stubborn, but she had never shown signs of delusion. Was age finally taking its toll? "Where did you get this balloon?" "I rented it from a company in Springfield. It cost all my savings from the last 6 months." "All your savings?" Grace felt her legs weaken. "Mom, what money was that?" "The money I saved every month from my pension. I was saving it in case I needed to leave here, but I changed my mind." Grace sat in the chair next to her mother, trying to process the information. The retirement savings. The money that would be needed to rent another place, buy furniture, settle into a new home. "You spent it all on a balloon. On a hope." The sound of approaching cars caught the attention of both. Grace saw 2 men in suits getting out of an official city car, followed by a third man she recognized from the law firm, handling the expropriation case. "It's them," murmured Faith, gripping the rope tighter. "Who are they?" "The men from the City Hall. They came to pressure me to leave sooner." Grace stood up and went to the gate before the men reached it. She knew the type. Bureaucrats used to dealing with difficult situations without showing emotion. "Good afternoon. Are you from the City Hall?" "I'm Anthony Mitchell from the Public Works Department," said the taller man. "Is this the residence of Mrs. Faith Henderson?" She's my mother. Can I help you with something? Anthony looked over Grace's shoulder and saw the balloon scene. He exchanged glances with the two companions before answering. We received some calls about an unusual situation here on the property. We came to check if everything is all right. Everything is fine, thank you. May I speak with Mrs. Faith? Grace hesitated but ended up stepping aside to let them pass. The three men walked to the porch where Faith remained seated, holding the balloon's rope. Mrs. Faith, Anthony began, I came here because we are worried about you. The neighbors called saying you were in a risky situation. The only risk I'm running is losing my home, she replied without looking at him. You received our notification. You have until next Friday to vacate the property. I'm not leaving. Mrs. Faith, you have no choice. The expropriation has been approved at all levels. The compensation is available for withdrawal. I don't want your money. Anthony sighed and signaled for one of the companions to approach. This is Dr. Morris, from the firm representing the construction company. He would like to make a proposal. Morris, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses, took a briefcase from the car and approached Faith. Mrs. Faith, I understand that moving is difficult for you. Therefore, our company has decided to offer an additional bonus of $10,000 on top of the official compensation, provided you voluntarily vacate the property by Thursday. Faith finally looked at him. 50 years of life can't be bought for $10,000. I understand the sentimental value, but you understand nothing, Faith cut him off. Do you have any idea what it means to live in the same place for 50 years? To have every brick, every board, every nail filled with memories? Maurice put the papers back in the briefcase. Unfortunately, feelings don't change legal matters. If you don't leave voluntarily, a judicial eviction will be necessary. Then do the eviction. The silence grew heavy. Grace watched the scene, unsure how to intervene. Her mother's stubbornness had always been a defining trait, but now it seemed to have evolved into something more concerning. Mrs. Faith, Anthony tried again, the balloon could represent a danger. If it falls, it could hurt someone. It won't fall. I'm holding it. You can't hold that rope forever. Yes, I can, until my husband arrives. The three men exchanged awkward glances. Morris whispered something in Anthony's ear, who shook his head. Mrs. Faith, I'll leave my card here. If you change your mind about the proposal, please get in touch. But remember, Thursday is the deadline. After they left, Grace sat down again beside her mother. Mum, we need to have a serious talk. There's nothing to talk about. I'm not leaving here. And after Thursday, when they come back with a court order, your father will show up before that. Grace took a deep breath. She needed help dealing with that situation, but didn't know who to turn to. Her older sister Helen lived in Chicago and they barely spoke. The neighbors clearly thought her mother had gone crazy, and she herself no longer knew what to think. Mum, can I see the letter Dad left? Faith looked at her with surprise. What letter? You said he promised to send a sign from heaven. He must have written it down somewhere. It wasn't a letter. It was a word-of-mouth promise. A word-of-mouth promise from 47 years ago. Your father's promises were always worth more than any signed paper. Grace felt the frustration growing in her chest. How do you talk to someone living in a world built on memories and hopes from decades past? The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Faith remained in the chair holding the rope, while Grace tried to convince her to at least come inside for dinner. The neighbors kept passing by the gate, some offering help, others just satisfying their curiosity. When the sun began to set, Grace brought a blanket and tried to convince her mother to let go of the rope for a few hours. Mum, you need to rest. I can't let go. What if your father arrives during the night and doesn't see the balloon? If he's really coming, he'll come with or without the balloon. No, it has to be this way. That's how he promised. Grace sighed and went to prepare coffee for them both. As she stirred the sugar in the cup, she tried to organize her thoughts. She needed to find a way to make her mother understand that this hope was destroying any chance of solving the situation in a practical way. When she returned with the coffee, she found her mother dozing in the chair, still holding the rope. The balloon swayed gently in the night wind, and for a moment Grace almost understood why that image could represent hope for someone. Almost. She covered her mother with the blanket and sat in the other chair, determined to spend the night there. If her mother was determined not to let go of that rope, at least she wouldn't be alone. During the early morning hours, Grace was awakened by a strange noise. Still sleepy, she looked around and saw that her mother was no longer in the chair. The balloon rope was tied to the porch railing, but Faith had disappeared. "Mom," she called softly, not wanting to wake the neighbors. A faint light came from inside the house. Grace got up and went in, finding her mother in the living room, kneeling before an old chest she hadn't seen in years. "Mom, what are you doing?" Faith looked up with red eyes. "Looking for the letters." "What letters?" "The letters I wrote to your father all these years." Grace felt a chill in her stomach. Letters to her father, all these years. You wrote letters to Dad? One a month every month for 47 years, always on the 15th, the day he left. Faith pulled a huge bundle of yellowed envelopes from the chest. Some were tied with ribbon, others loose, all with the same name handwritten on the front, James Henderson. "Mom, how many letters are these?" 564. 47 years times 12 months, minus the times I was too sick to write. Grace knelt beside her mother and took one of the letters. The envelope was yellowed with age, and the pen ink had faded. The date in the corner showed September 1982. "You never sent them." "Where would I send them? He didn't leave an address. He said when he could, he would get in touch." "And he never did?" "Not yet, but he will." Grace carefully opened the envelope and read the letter. They were 3 handwritten pages, telling about daily life, about how the daughters were growing up, about financial difficulties, about longing. The handwriting was firmer than the current one, but the tone was the same, hope mixed with sadness. "May I read a few more?" Faith nodded and continued organizing the letters by date. Grace picked up some random ones from different years and read them silently. Each letter was a portrait of an entire life dedicated to waiting. There were letters talking about the daughter's first day of school, about neighbors' weddings, about the grandparents' deaths, about Christmas alone, about birthdays without a party. They all ended the same way. "Waiting for your return with eternal love, Faith." "Mom." Grace felt her throat tighten. "Why did you never tell us about these letters?" "You wouldn't have understood. Helen always said your father had abandoned you. You were too young to remember him properly. It was easier to keep this just for me. But you spent your whole life writing to someone who is going to come back," Faith completed. "And when he comes back, he will see that I kept my word to wait for him." Grace spent the rest of the early morning reading the letters. It was like traveling through her mother's life through the years, seeing how she had faced all the difficulties alone, always keeping the flame of hope alive. When dawn broke, she understood a little better why her mother had tied a balloon to the roof. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. The second day with the balloon brought more curious onlookers. People from other neighborhoods began to appear, some bringing food for Faith, others just to take pictures. A journalist from the local radio station showed up late in the morning. "Mrs. Faith, I'm Marcus from Valley Radio. May I ask a few questions about your story?" Grace tried to intervene, but her mother signaled it was no problem. "What would you like to say to the people listening about your situation?" "I want to say that promises still mean something in this world, and that true love has no expiration date." "Do you really believe your husband will return after almost 5 decades?" "I don't believe. I know." "And if he doesn't come?" "He will come." The interview aired on the afternoon program and generated a bigger reaction than Grace expected. The home phone started ringing with people offering help, others criticizing her mother's fantasy. Helen called from Chicago in the late afternoon, furious. "Grace, what the hell is going on there? My neighbor called me saying she saw our mother on television with a giant balloon." "It's a long story, Helen. Summary, please." "I'm at work." Grace explained the situation as briefly as possible. Helen was silent for a few seconds before exploding. "She's gone crazy. Grace, our mother is delusional about a man who abandoned us decades ago." "It's not exactly like that." Yes, it is, and you're feeding her fantasy by staying there. Put her in a car and bring her to Chicago. I'll arrange a geriatrician. Helen, she's not senile. She's just living in a fantasy world. And you too, it seems. The call ended with Helen hanging up the phone. Grace stared at the receiver, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Maybe her sister was right. Maybe she was being too indulgent with her mother's delusions. But the letters... Those letters showed a dedication that went far beyond delusion. They showed love, true hope. And who was she to say what kind of hope was worth having? On Wednesday, the situation became more complicated. A group of people showed up at the house with signs supporting Faith. They positioned themselves outside the gate, singing old romantic songs and shouting words of encouragement. "Mrs. Faith, you are an example of true love. Don't give up, he will come back." The commotion attracted more onlookers and more cars. The quiet street became a real tourist spot. The neighbors began to complain about the noise and the activity. Martha appeared on the porch, visibly irritated. "Faith, this has gone too far. My granddaughter can't sleep with this crowd shouting." "I didn't ask them to come," replied Faith, "but you're the one who created this situation. Take that balloon down and send everyone away." "I can't take the balloon down." The argument between the two was interrupted by the arrival of a television van. Grace felt her stomach turn. This was spiraling completely out of control. The reporter, a young man of about 30, approached with a cameraman. "Mrs. Faith, I'm Robert Mitchell from Regional TV. Your story is moving the entire region. Could you talk a little about this long wait for your husband?" "It's not a wait, it's a certainty." "How have you maintained this certainty for so long?" Faith pointed to the house. "Because this house holds everything we lived together. Every room has a memory of ours. The bedroom where we slept, the kitchen where he drank coffee every morning, the porch where we sat to talk at the end of the day. And now the house is going to be demolished. That's why he needs to come soon." The interview aired on the evening news and again generated a wave of reactions. Some people criticized the city for the demolition, others questioned Faith's sanity. The case became a topic on social media with hashtags like "Let Faith Wait" and "50-Year Love." Grace spent the night answering calls from journalists, distant relatives who hadn't been in touch for years, and complete strangers offering help or advice. On Thursday morning, the deadline given by the city, a crowd formed in front of the house. There were supporters with signs, onlookers with cell phones, journalists from various cities, and even some people selling water and snacks. Anthony, the city employee, arrived accompanied by 2 police officers and a court officer. "Mrs. Faith, the time has come. You need to leave the property." "I'm not leaving." "Ma'am, I have a court order here. If you don't leave voluntarily, you will be removed by force." The crowd began to protest. Some people positioned themselves between the police and Faith, shouting that she had the right to stay in her own house. "Please, everyone," tried the older police officer. "We don't want any trouble. It's just a legal matter." "Legal for whom?" shouted a woman from the crowd. "For the rich people who want to build a building on top of this lady's life?" The situation was getting tense. Grace saw it was time to intervene. "Everyone, please, let's resolve this calmly." She approached the court officer. "How much time does my mother have to leave?" "Officially until the end of today, but I'll give until tomorrow morning considering her age and the situation." Faith heard the conversation and stood up from her chair for the first time in 3 days, still holding the balloon string. "I don't need more time. My husband will arrive today." "Mom." Grace tried to approach. "He promised, Grace. When I was in real danger, he would send a sign from heaven." Faith pointed to the balloon. "This is my signal to him, and his to me will come." As if the universe wanted to contradict her words, the strong afternoon wind began to shake the balloon violently. One of the ropes came loose from the roof, and the balloon began to lean to one side. "The balloon!" shouted Faith, pulling the rope with force. "Mom, let go of that." Grace ran to help. "I can't let go. If I let go, he won't see the signal." The rope was burning Faith's hands, but she refused to let go. The balloon was pulling hard and she was being dragged. "Mom, let go of the rope," shouted one of the police officers. "Never." What happened next was too fast for anyone to react. A stronger gust of wind made the balloon give a violent tug. Faith was dragged and fell to the ground, hurting her right arm. The crowd screamed. The police officers ran to help. Grace knelt beside her mother, who was crying more from sadness than from pain. "My balloon," she murmured through tears. "Without the balloon, he won't find me." An ambulance was called. While the paramedics tended to Faith's arm, she kept looking at the balloon, which now hung limp, half deflated. "Mum, you need to go to the hospital." "I can't go. He might arrive today." "Mum, look at the balloon. It's ruined. Even if Dad comes, he won't see the signal." Faith looked at the deflated balloon and finally seemed to understand the reality of the situation. Her face dissolved into an expression of total defeat. 50 years. 50 years of waiting. Grace held her mother's good hand. "Let's go to the hospital, get this arm taken care of. Then we'll talk about the rest." Faith nodded, as if all the energy had been sucked from her body. She let the paramedics put her on the stretcher without resistance. When the ambulance drove away, the crowd began to slowly disperse. What remained was an empty house, a deflated balloon on the roof, and a lonely rope on the ground. At the hospital, Faith had her arm put in a cast and was kept for observation for a few hours. Grace used the time to call Helen and tell her what had happened. "Maybe it was for the best," said Helen. "Now she'll have to face reality." "I don't know if it was for the best, Helen. You should have seen how devastated she was. Grace, our mother spent 50 years living an illusion. It was time to wake up. But what if it's not an illusion?" "What do you mean?" "What if Dad really had a reason for not coming back? What if he's alive somewhere?" Helen was silent for a moment. "Grace, you're starting to sound like her." "I'm serious. I read the letters she wrote all these years. It's not the stuff of someone living a fantasy. It's the stuff of someone who truly loves someone." "Grace, Helen, do you remember him? Do you remember what Dad was like with us?" "Vaguely. He was affectionate, worked a lot. And was he the kind of man who would abandon his family?" Helen took a while to answer. "I don't know, Grace. I was very little, and people change, especially under pressure. Or maybe things happened that we don't know about." Grace hung up the phone more confused than before. She spent the rest of the afternoon at the hospital thinking about what she really knew of her father's story. Very little, actually. Her mother always avoided talking about the subject in detail, and the daughters had grown up accepting that he had simply abandoned them. But what if that wasn't the case? When Faith was discharged in the late afternoon, they returned home and found the property empty and silent. The balloon was still on the roof, but now it just looked like a strange, out-of-place object. "Mum, do you want me to take the balloon down?" "Leave it there. It doesn't make a difference anymore." Faith sat in the same chair where she had spent 3 days and looked at her own hands. The cast on her arm prevented her from holding anything firmly. "Grace?" "Yes, Mom? Do you think I'm going crazy?" The question caught Grace off guard. Her mother seemed lucid, just very sad. "I don't think you're crazy, Mum. I think you miss him very much." "Missing someone doesn't explain 50 years of waiting." "Then you explain it to me. Why did you wait so long?" Faith took a deep breath. "Because I knew your father. I knew his heart, and the James I knew would never abandon his family of his own free will. But, Mum, people change. Not like that. Not James." "How can you be so sure?" "Because on the last night before he left, we made a promise to each other." Grace sat in the chair next to her mother. "What promise?" "We promised that, no matter what happened, we would always find a way to be together. He said that if I were ever in danger and he couldn't come get me himself, he would send a signal from the sky to let me know he was trying to help me." "And what did you promise?" "That I would always keep our home ready for the day he returned, and that if I were ever about to lose the house, I would make a signal in the sky so he could find me." Grace felt a shiver. The promise made sense within the logic of that relationship, but it still didn't explain why her father had never given any sign of life. "Mum, what if something happened to him? Something that prevented him from coming back or getting in touch?" "I've thought about that thousands of times. But if something had happened, someone would have come to tell us, right?" "Not necessarily. Where did he go to work again?" "In Cleveland, at an airplane parts factory." "And did you try to contact the factory?" "I tried several times in the first few years. But they said he had left the company and they had no information about where he went. Grace made a mental note to research that later. Perhaps there were clues her mother hadn't been able to follow at the time due to a lack of resources or knowledge. "Mum, the men from the city are coming back tomorrow." "I know. And now?" "Now I don't know what to do anymore. The balloon was my last resort." Grace looked at her mother and saw an old and tired woman, not the determined person who had faced authorities and crowds for the last 3 days. "Do you want me to call Helen? She said we could go to Chicago." "And live off my daughter's charity? At 72? "It would be temporary until you get settled." "Settled for what, Grace?" "To live a few more years in a city I don't know, far from everything that is my life." The question left Grace without an answer. Really, what did they expect a 72-year-old woman to do after losing the house she lived in for 5 decades? "Mom, can't the compensation from the city buy you a small house somewhere near here? It might be enough to rent a little apartment, but it's not the same." "It's not, but—" "Grace, you don't understand. This house isn't just a place where I live. It's the last piece of him I have left." Grace looked around. The house really was full of memories. The furniture was old, some pieces made by her father himself before he left. The walls had family photos, ruler marks measuring the girls' heights, small repairs made over the years. "Mom, you take the memories with you." "That's not true. Memories become more alive when you have the places to remember them by." That night, Grace had trouble sleeping. She kept thinking about everything that had happened in the last few days. Her mother's stubbornness, the letters, the promise, the crowd, the balloon, and now the prospect of having to convince an elderly woman to abandon her entire life to start over from scratch. On Friday morning, Anthony arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, accompanied by the same police officers from yesterday and a moving truck. "Mrs. Faith, I'm sorry, but the time has come. You have 2 hours to remove your personal belongings. Whatever doesn't fit in the truck will be donated." Faith, still with her arm in a cast, nodded. "You can begin. I won't resist." The mother's surrender was harder for Grace to accept than all her previous resistance. It was as if she had given up not just the house, but everything. "Mom, do you want me to help choose what to take?" "Take whatever you think is important. It's all the same to me." Grace spent 2 hours rushing through the house, trying to decide what to save from 50 years of life. The letters to her father, obviously, the family photos, some clothes, some smaller furniture that would fit in the truck. The rest was left behind. The kitchen table where the family had coffee, the living room sofa where they watched television together, the couple's bed where Grace had been conceived. When the truck left, Faith was sitting in the passenger seat, looking out the rear window as the house fell behind. She didn't cry, didn't say a word. She just looked. Grace drove in silence, not knowing what to say. They were going to a small apartment she had managed to rent near the city center. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a tiny kitchen, nothing like the spacious house where her mother had spent her entire life. In the new apartment, Faith sat in a chair in the middle of the empty living room and stayed there motionless for hours. Grace unpacked things, tried to arrange the furniture, made food. Her mother showed no interest in anything. "Mom, don't you want to see how the bedroom turned out?" Faith shook her head, no. "Do you want to eat something?" Another negative sign. "Do you want me to turn on the television?" Once again, no. Grace began to worry seriously. Her mother seemed to be slipping into depression, and she didn't know how to handle it. Helen called in the late afternoon. "How is Mom?" "Bad. She doesn't speak, doesn't eat, shows no interest in anything." "Maybe it's better if she comes to Chicago after all. I can arrange for a doctor." "Helen, before we make that decision, I want to try to find out one thing." "What?" "I want to investigate what really happened to Dad." "Grace." Not to feed Mom's fantasies. To give her a definitive answer, so she can accept reality, whatever it may be. Helen was silent for a moment. "All right. But how do you plan to do that? So much time has passed. I'll start at the factory where he worked. There must be some old records. And if you find out he really did abandon us, it will leave Mom even more devastated. or it will give her the closure she needs to move on. On Saturday morning, Grace left her mother with a neighbor in the building and took the bus to Cleveland. The company where her father had worked still existed, though much larger and modernized. In the Human Resources Department, she explained the situation to a young employee who was sympathetic. "Look, Mrs. Grace, records from 50 years ago aren't easy to find, but I'll see what I can do. I just need to know if he really left the company voluntarily or if something happened. Let me check the old archive." The employee returned after an hour with a dusty folder. "I found his record. James Henderson, hired in March 1975, terminated in September 1976. Terminated? He didn't leave voluntarily. According to the records, there was a work accident in August 1976. He was on leave for a month and then was terminated due to permanent disability." Grace felt her blood run cold. What kind of accident? There are no details here. It just says there was a spinal injury with impaired movement. And what happened to him after the termination? We don't have that information, but I can give you the address he left when he left the company. Grace wrote down the address and thanked the employee. Her heart was racing. A work accident that left her father with lasting injuries. That would explain a lot. The address was in a simple neighborhood of Cleveland. Grace took a taxi there and found a small house on a quiet street. She hesitated before knocking on the door, not knowing exactly what to say. A woman around 60 years old answered. "Good afternoon. Did you know a James Henderson who lived here a long time ago?" The woman looked at her curiously. "James Henderson, the name sounds familiar, but it was so long ago." "He would have lived here around 1976, 1977. "Oh yes, the man who rented the little room in the back. I remember him. He was very private, didn't talk much." "Do you remember anything else about him?" "I remember he limped a lot. I think he had some problem with his legs. And sometimes I heard him crying in his room at night." Grace felt a pang in her chest. "How long did he live here?" "About 2 years, maybe 3. Then he left without notice. He left some things in the room." "What kind of things?" "Old clothes, some papers. My husband threw everything away after a few months." "You don't remember if he had family? If he talked about a wife, daughters?" The woman thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I remember once he received a letter and cried for hours. And another time I heard him talking to himself about 2 girls, but he never told anything about his life." Grace thanked her and said goodbye. In the taxi back to downtown, she tried to organize the information. Her father had been injured at work, became disabled, was fired, lived alone in a rented room for a few years, and then disappeared. But why hadn't he gone back home? Why hadn't he looked for his family? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Back at the apartment, Grace found her mother exactly in the same position she had left her in that morning, sitting in the chair, staring into space. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Faith looked at her for the first time that day. "I found out some things about Dad." Interest appeared immediately in her mother's eyes. "What did you find out?" Grace told her about the visit to the factory, about the accident, about the dismissal, about the house where he lived. Faith listened to everything in silence, and when her daughter finished, she asked, "He was disabled?" "According to the records, yes. He had problems with his spine." "And he lived alone in a room?" "For a few years." Faith closed her eyes and was silent for several minutes. "He didn't come back because he didn't want us to see him like that." "That's a possibility." "No, Grace. I knew your father. He was very proud. He would never have gone back home unable to work, unable to support the family. But, Mom, you would have preferred that to being abandoned." "Of course I would, but he didn't know that." Faith got up from the chair for the first time since they arrived at the apartment. "I need to go after him." "Mom, that was 50 years ago. He could be anywhere. He could even be—" "Dead?" Faith completed. "He could be, but as long as I don't know for sure, I'll keep looking." "How do you intend to look? Where do we start?" "With the last clue we have. That woman who rented the room to him. She might know where he went." "Mom, she said he left without notice." "But he might have left some clue. He might have talked to a neighbor. He might have had a friend in the area. Grace saw that her mother had regained some of her determination. It was better than yesterday's depression, but she didn't know if it was healthy to feed another hope. "All right, Mum. Tomorrow we go back there and ask more questions." "No, Grace. Today." "Today? Mum, it's already late. I lost 47 years. I'm not losing another day." On Sunday afternoon, they were back at the woman's house in Cleveland. This time, it was Faith who knocked on the door. "Good afternoon, Ma'am. My daughter was here yesterday asking about James Henderson." "Oh, yes. Are you family of his?" "I'm his wife." The woman's mouth fell open in surprise. "His wife? But he lived alone." "It's a long story. Would you mind telling us everything you remember about him?" The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Antonia, invited them in and made some coffee. During the conversation, some important information came up. He worked doing odd jobs in the area, furniture repair, gardening, things like that, but it was hard for him because of his difficulty walking. "Did he have any friends?" "He had a friend who showed up from time to time, an older gentleman. I think he also worked at the same factory." "Do you remember his name?" "Emmanuel something. Emmanuel Santos? Mitchell? I don't remember well." "And would you know where to find this Emmanuel?" "He died about 10 years ago, but his widow still lives in the neighborhood." Mrs. Antonia gave them the address of Emmanuel's widow, and they went there that same day. The woman, Mrs. Rose, was about 80 years old, and her memory was a bit faulty, but she remembered her husband talking about a friend who had been injured at work. "Emmanuel always said that poor James didn't go back home out of shame for being crippled." "Do you know if Emmanuel kept in touch with him after he left here?" "Yes, he did. They corresponded. I even have some letters saved if you'd like to see them." Faith's heart raced. "Letters from James?" Mrs. Rose returned with a shoebox full of papers. Among them were 3 letters signed by James Henderson, dated from the early 1980s. "May I read them?" asked Faith, her hands trembling. "Of course, dear." The first letter was from 1980 and said, "Dear Emmanuel, I hope you are well. I'm living in Springfield now, working in a workshop. The work is light, things I can do sitting down. I still think about going back home, but how do I get there after so long? How do I explain that I disappeared out of pride? They must have forgotten me or they hate me. It's better to leave things as they are." The second was from 1982. "Emmanuel, I heard you got that job at the transport company. I'm happy for you. I'm still here in Springfield, but I've been thinking about moving. The city is growing a lot of violence. I thought about going back to the countryside. Sometimes I pass by the bus station and think about buying a ticket home. But what if they don't want me anymore?" The third from 1984. "My friend, this is my last letter from this address. I'm moving to a small town in the Kentucky countryside. I got a job as a janitor at a school. It's not much money, but it's enough for me. No need to write back because by the time you get this letter, I'll already be gone. Take care, and thank you for all the friendship. James." Faith finished reading the third letter with tears in her eyes. He was alive in 1984, and he was thinking about coming back. "Mum, that was 40 years ago." "But it's a clue. A school in the Kentucky countryside." Mrs. Rose looked at Faith with pity. "My dear, 40 years is a long time. He could have moved many times after that. He could have, but at least now we know he didn't abandon us. He wanted to come back." Grace saw hope reborn in her mother's eyes and didn't know whether to be happy or worried. "Mom, how are we going to find a school in the Kentucky countryside without even knowing the name of the town? We'll look, one by one if we have to." "Mom, that's impossible. For someone who waited 47 years, nothing is impossible." On the way back home, Faith was as excited as she had been in weeks. She made plans about how to research schools in the Kentucky countryside, about how to start the search. Grace, on the other hand, was worried. What if they really found their father? What if he didn't want to see them again? And what if he had already started another family? What if they discovered he had passed away? "Mother, have you considered the possibility that he might not want to be found?" "I have. But I need to try. I need to at least give him the chance to choose. And what if it's too late? Then at least I'll know I tried everything. That night, Helen called, and Grace told her about the day's discoveries. Grace, you're getting into a dangerous obsession. Even if you find him, what do you think will happen? A romantic reunion after 50 years. Helen, Mother has the right to try. She also has the right to get even more hurt. At least now we know she wasn't delusional. Daddy really didn't abandon us out of ill will. No, but he abandoned us all the same. The result is the same. Grace fell silent. Helen, don't you want to know what happened to our father? I want peace for our mother. And this search won't bring peace, it will bring more suffering. Maybe, but maybe it will bring answers. On Monday, Faith woke up early and was already researching on the internet. She had asked Grace to teach her how to use the computer about schools in rural Kentucky. Mother, how many schools do you think there are in rural Kentucky? Many. But let's start with the oldest ones, the ones that already existed in 1984. And how are we going to do this research? Call all of them? If necessary. Grace realized her mother was determined and decided to help, at least to maintain some control over the situation. All right, Mother, let's do a systematic search, but with organization. They spent the entire week creating lists of towns in rural Kentucky, identifying old schools, getting phone numbers. It was a huge task, but Faith showed more energy than she had in months. The first calls yielded no results. Most schools didn't have records of employees from decades ago, or the people who answered didn't know how to give information about former employees. Mother, this is going to take years. Then it will take years. You're 72 years old. You don't have years to waste. It's not a waste if I'm doing what I believe in. On Thursday of the second week of searching, they got their first promising lead. A school in a town called Greenfield had records of a janitor named James who had worked there in the 1980s. Grace, this could be him. Calm down, Mother. James is a very common name. But James Henderson? That's also common. We need to verify. The school principal was willing to help and said she would check the old records. She promised to call back the next day. Faith stayed awake all night, anxious. Grace tried to contain her mother's anxiety, but she was equally nervous. On Friday, the call came. Mrs. Faith, I'm the principal of the school in Greenfield. I found the record you're looking for. James Henderson, janitor between 1984 and 1989. Faith held the phone tightly. And after 1989? He retired due to disability. The records show he had back problems. Do you know where he went after retirement? I have an address from that time here, Flower Street, number 47. But that was over 30 years ago. I don't know if it's still valid. Faith wrote down the address with trembling hands. Thank you so much, Principal. You have no idea how much you've helped me. After hanging up, Faith turned to Grace with shining eyes. We found him. We know where he was in 1989. Mother, that was over 30 years ago. He could have moved several times since then. Or he could be in the same place. Elderly, sick men don't move much. When do you want to go there? Now. Now? Mother, it's a trip of several hours. Grace, I've waited 47 years. I'm not waiting one more day. 2 hours later, they were on the road toward Greenfield. Faith spent the entire trip in silence, looking out the window, lost in thought. Grace drove, worried about what they would find. What if her father had died? What if he was alive but didn't want to see them? What if he had dementia? What if he had another family? Mom, have you thought about what you'll say to him if we're right? I have. And what will you say? That I love him, that I've always loved him, and that I don't care if he's sick, old, poor, or whatever. I just want us to be together for whatever time we have left. Grace felt her eyes well up. Regardless of the outcome, she was proud of her mother's courage. Greenfield was a small town with dirt roads and simple houses. Finding Flower Street was easy. Finding number 47 was too. But the house was empty and had for sale signs. He must have moved, murmured Grace. Or... Faith didn't finish the sentence. They knocked on the neighbor's house to ask about the former resident. A middle-aged woman answered. Ma'am, we're looking for a person who used to live next door, James Henderson. Mr. James? Oh, it's been about 5 years since he lived there. Faith's heart raced. 5 years? So he was alive 5 years ago? Yes, he was, a very polite, very quiet gentleman. Very quiet. He used a cane because of a back problem. Do you know where he went? He went to live with a niece in Denver. The house here became too much for him to maintain alone. Do you have any information about this niece? No, I don't. I just know she came to get him with a moving truck. She was a young woman, very caring with him. Faith and Grace looked at each other. Denver. A niece. Her father was alive 5 years ago, and maybe still was. Could you tell us anything else? Any detail? Let me think. Oh yes, I remember the young woman had a car with Denver plates. And Mr. James mentioned once that she was the daughter of a brother of his. Brother? Faith was confused. James didn't have any brothers. Maybe it was a more distant relative. Sometimes people call any younger relative a niece or nephew, right? They thanked her and returned to the car. And now, Mom, how are we going to find this niece in Denver? The same way we found him up to this point. Step by step. Mom, Denver is a huge city. But now we know he's alive, or at least he was 5 years ago. What if we're not finding the right person? What if it's another James Henderson? Faith thought for a moment. There's only one way to know. Keep looking. The return trip was quieter than the way there. Faith was absorbed in her thoughts, planning the next steps of the search. At home, she immediately went back to the computer, now searching for Hendersons in Denver. It was an even more difficult task than the previous one, but she seemed determined. Grace called Helen to share the news. "You two are going crazy," was her sister's reaction. "Chasing ghosts in unknown cities." "Helen, it's not a ghost. He's alive, or at least he was recently." "So what? You think you're going to knock on the niece's door and he'll fall into Mom's arms? Grace, this isn't a romantic movie." "No, Helen, but it's our mother's real life, and she has the right to try to close this chapter once and for all. She also has the right to get hurt. Everyone has the right to get hurt trying. It's better than getting hurt from giving up." Helen hung up annoyed, and Grace wondered if her sister wasn't right. Maybe they were being too naive. But seeing her mother's determination, seeing how she had come out of depression and regained a purpose, Grace thought it was worth trying. The search for Hendersons in Denver proved even more difficult than expected. There were hundreds of families with that surname, spread throughout the city. "Mum, this is going to be impossible without more information. Then we'll get more information. We'll go back to Greenfield and ask more neighbors. Just for that, it's a trip of several hours. It's worth it." The following Saturday, they were back in the small town. This time, they knocked on every house on Flower Street asking about James Henderson. At the fifth house, an elderly lady remembered more details. "Mr. James was very reserved, but we talked from time to time. He once told me that his niece works at a school in Denver." "A school? What kind of school?" "A children's school. He said she was a teacher." It was another clue, a teacher in Denver. "Do you remember if he mentioned his niece's name?" "Yes, he did. A pretty name. Letitia. Lucy. Something with an L." "And anything else about the school?" "No, just that it was a big school downtown." They returned home with this new information. Faith spent the following days researching large schools in downtown Denver, trying to find teachers with names starting with L. "Mom, how many Letitias and Lucys must be working in schools in Denver?" "Many, but we'll find her." "How?" "By calling the schools and asking if any teacher has an uncle named James Henderson who used to live in rural Kentucky." Grace thought the strategy was a bit absurd, but decided to help. They divided the list of schools and began making calls. Most schools wouldn't give out information about staff over the phone. Some were polite, others hung up. But at the 10th school on Faith's list, there was a different reaction. "James Henderson?" repeated the secretary. "Let me see. Teacher Lucy has an uncle by that name who came to live with her a few years ago." Faith's heart almost stopped. "Could you give me Teacher Lucy's contact information?" "I can't give out personal information of employees, but I can pass along a message if you'd like." "Yes, please." Tell her that Mr. James's wife has been looking for him for many years." "Wife?" The secretary sounded surprised. "Teacher Lucy never mentioned her uncle was married." "It's a long story. Could you ask her to call me?" Faith gave her phone number and waited anxiously. The call came in the late afternoon. "Hello, Mrs. Faith? This is Lucy, from the school. The secretary gave me your message, but I think there's some mistake." "A mistake? Why?" "My Uncle James was never married. He's always lived alone." Faith felt the ground give way beneath her feet. "What do you mean, never married? He never spoke of a family." "Never. And he's lived with me for 4 years. If he had a family, he certainly would have mentioned it." "But is he James Henderson, worked at a factory in Cleveland in the 1970s? "That's right. He had a work accident and has back problems." "Then it's him." Faith's heart raced. "He must have hidden from you that he had a family." "Mrs. Faith, I don't want to give you false hope, but you might be looking for different people. James Henderson is a very common name." "No, it's him, I'm sure." "Could you come here so we can talk in person? Maybe that would be better." "Yes, I can." "When?" "Tomorrow, if you'd like. After my work hours, around 5 in the evening." Faith wrote down the address and hung up, euphoric. "Grace, it's him. We found your father." "Calm down, Mom. The young lady said it could be someone else." "It can't be. Factory in Cleveland, back injury. It's him." "But why would he never mention his family to his niece?" "Because he still feels guilty for abandoning us. But now we're going to sort everything out." Grace saw the sparkle in her mother's eyes and prayed she wouldn't be disappointed tomorrow. On Monday, they left early for Denver. Faith had dressed meticulously, done her hair, put on a nice dress. She was as nervous as a teenager going on a first date. "Mother, you have to be prepared for the possibility that it's not him." "It is him, Grace. I feel it. And if it is him, and he doesn't want to restart the relationship, he will want to. I know he will." Lucy's address was in a middle-class neighborhood of Denver, a simple, well-kept house with a small garden in front. Grace knocked on the door at 5 o'clock sharp. A woman around 40 answered, her face marked by worry. "Mrs. Faith, I'm Lucy." "A pleasure, dear. This is my daughter, Grace. Please come in." The living room was simple but cozy. Lucy offered coffee and sat in the armchair across from them. "Well, I'll be direct with you. My uncle is here at home, but he didn't want to meet you today." Faith's blood ran cold. "Why?" "Because he's scared. When I told him a woman who claimed to be his wife wanted to see him, he got very agitated." "Agitated how? Nervous? Anxious? He said it couldn't be true, that you couldn't be looking for him after so long." Faith and Grace exchanged glances. "So it really is him?" "It seems so. He confirmed he was married in the past, that he had daughters, but he said he never wanted to talk about it again because the pain was too great." "Pain of what?" "Of having abandoned the family. He feels very guilty." "But can he see us?" Lucy hesitated. "He said he'll only talk to you if you answer some questions that only the true wife would know." "What questions?" "What was the nickname he used for you, where they met, and what was the last thing he said before he left?" Faith smiled for the first time that day. "The nickname was Froggy, because I had a habit of jumping in puddles when I was young. We met at the church dance in 1975, and the last thing he said was, 'Faith, I'll come back as soon as I save up money for us to buy our own house.'" Lucy's mouth fell open. "That's exactly what he said the true wife would answer." "So can I see him?" "He's in the bedroom, very nervous, but he said if the answers were right, he'd come down." Lucy went upstairs and they heard muffled voices from above. Faith was trembling with anxiety. "Mother, do you want me to come with you?" "No. This first moment needs to be just ours." Footsteps on the stairs. Lucy came down first, followed by a figure that made Faith's heart stop. It was James. Older, white hair, thinner, walking slowly with a cane. But it was James. They stood still, looking at each other for several seconds. 50 years of separation were being summed up in a single glance. "Froggy," murmured James, his voice choked. "James," replied Faith, rising from her chair. They met in the middle of the room. James dropped his cane and hugged her tightly. as if wanting to recover all the hugs lost over the years. "Forgive me," he whispered in her ear. "Forgive me for being a coward." "There's nothing to forgive," answered Faith, crying. "You came back. That's what matters." Grace watched the scene with tears in her eyes. Her father was there. He really was. After the initial embrace, James turned to her. "Grace? My little girl?" "Hi, Dad." The hug with his daughter was equally emotional. James held her as if he couldn't believe she was there. "You've grown up," he said, trying to make a joke to lighten the emotion. "I sure have. I'm 45 now. And Helen? My Helen?" "She's in Chicago, married, with children. Your grandchildren." James sat in the armchair, still processing the information. "Grandchildren? Do I have grandchildren?" "Yes. 2 boys and 1 girl." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversation, explanations, tears, and reconciliation. James told of the years of loneliness, about the accident, about the shame of returning home disabled. Faith spoke about the letters she wrote, about how she kept the house always tidy waiting for him, about the balloon. "Balloon?" James didn't understand. Faith told the whole story. The expropriation of the house, the balloon tied to the roof, his promise to send a signal from the sky. "Did I really say that?" James seemed surprised. "You did, and I took it seriously for 50 years. Faith, I didn't imagine you would wait so long. I knew you would come back. But what if I had died? Would you have waited forever?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer left James speechless. Lucy, who had observed everything in silence, offered to prepare dinner for everyone. During the meal, they tried to recover 5 decades of separation. "Dad, why did you never try to get in touch?" asked Grace, "even if it was just a letter." "Because I was ashamed and afraid. Ashamed of having disappeared for so long, afraid you would reject me." "We would never reject you." "How could I know? In my mind, you had moved on with your lives. Maybe Faith had married again." "Daddy." Grace held his hand. "Mom never looked at another man. Never." James looked at Faith with admiration and sadness. 50 years of your life lost because of my cowardice." "They weren't lost. They were invested in love." When it came time to decide the next steps, the situation became complicated. Lucy made it clear that James was welcome to stay there as long as he wanted. Faith wanted to take her husband back with her. James seemed torn between the 2 worlds. "James, I understand you're confused," said Faith. "It's 50 years to process, but now that we've found each other, I don't want to waste any more time." "Faith, I'm not the same man you married anymore. I'm old, sick, with no money. I'm old too, and I also have no money. We lost our house last week." "What do you mean you lost the house?" Faith told about the expropriation, about the small apartment, about how she was trying to rebuild her life at 72. "So you don't have a proper place to live?" "We have the apartment. It's small, but it's enough for the 2 of us." James was silent for a while. "Lucy, would you mind if I went with them for a few weeks, just to try to reconnect?" "Uncle, you do what your heart tells you, but know you'll always have a home here." "And you, Faith, are you sure you want me back after so long?" "James, if I weren't sure, I wouldn't have tied a balloon to the roof of my house." That night, Grace called Helen to tell her they had found their father. "You found him?" Helen couldn't believe it. "He's alive?" "Yes, and he's coming back home with Mom." "Grace, and this is very strange. Too much time has passed. How will they readjust?" "I don't know, Helen, but they deserve to try." "And if it doesn't work out?" "Then at least they'll know they tried." Helen was silent. "I want to meet him. He wants to see you too, and meet the grandchildren. I'll arrange some time off work and come down there next week." The next day, James packed his few things and said goodbye to Lucy with a promise to always keep in touch. "Uncle, if it doesn't work out, you come back, okay?" "It will work out, girl. This time it will." The trip back home was surreal. Faith and James in the back seat, talking softly, him holding her hand. Grace driving and trying to believe this was really happening. "Dad, Do you remember the house where we lived? I remember every detail. I've dreamed of that house thousands of times. It was demolished. To build a housing complex, James was sad. Our house, where you grew up. Houses we can rebuild, James, said Faith. What's important is the family being together. Back at the apartment, James looked around curiously. It's small, but it's cozy. Do you want the bedroom, or do you prefer the living room sofa? Faith, we were married for 3 years. You don't need to stand on ceremony with me. That was 3 years, 50 years ago, James. We're different people now. Not so different, Faith smiled. So, want to share the bedroom with me? If you don't mind an old, crippled man who snores. I snore now too. Grace watched her parents' dialogue and realized that, despite the time, there was still chemistry between them. The first days were about adjustment, James getting to know the new home, getting used to the routine, sharing spaces. Faith learning to live again with a male presence, with the snoring, with socks scattered about. But at the same time, it was as if they were recovering something that had never truly been lost. Conversations flowed naturally, silences were comfortable, small gestures of affection appeared spontaneously. Helen arrived the following Thursday, clearly nervous to meet her father. James was equally anxious. "Helen?" he said when she entered the apartment. "Hi, Dad." The hug was more cautious than Grace's, but sincere. "You look just like your mother when she was young." "Everyone says that." "And my grandchildren? Did you bring photos?" Helen spent the afternoon showing photos of the children, telling about life in Chicago, about her husband, about work. James listened to everything attentively, trying to recover a whole lifetime of absence in a few hours. "Dad, do you regret not coming back sooner?" asked Helen. "I do. But there's no use living in regret. What's important is to make the most of the time we have left. And how much time is that? I don't know, daughter. But whatever comes, I want to live it by my family's side." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. The following weeks were about mutual discovery. James and Faith relearned how to live together, to share the space, to make decisions together. It wasn't always easy. 50 years of independent life create habits that are hard to break. But the love was there. Different from the young, intense love of decades past, but more mature, more aware of the value of simple things. James began to help with the household chores his physical condition allowed. Faith took care of him when his back pain intensified. They created a new routine, a new way of being a couple. 1 month after the reunion, James surprised Faith with a request. "Faith, I want to renew our marriage vows." Renew. But we never officially separated. Not legally, but in practice it was 50 years apart. I want us to get married again. This time, knowing the value of what we have. James, we're too old for these things. Old is an understatement. That's exactly why we can't waste time. The ceremony was simple, at the parish house of the neighborhood church. Only Grace, Helen, and the grandchildren as witnesses. The priest, a young man who was moved by the story, officiated the renewal of vows with special care. "James, do you take Faith to be your wife, to love and to cherish in sickness and in health, for better, for worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do, and I promise not to be a coward ever again." "Faith, do you take James to be your husband, to love and to cherish in sickness and in health, for better, for worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do, and I promise to keep hoping for the best, always." There was no big party, but there was genuine happiness. In the late afternoon, back at the apartment, James and Faith sat on the small balcony to watch the sunset. "Do you regret waiting so long?" he asked. "Do you regret taking so long to come back?" she replied. "I do regret it." "I don't regret waiting. I only regret losing the house where you said you'd return." "Faith, home is where family is, and now our family is complete again." She held his hand. "You know what makes me happiest?" "What?" "Knowing that my balloon worked." "What do you mean it worked?" "I never even saw the balloon." "You didn't need to see it. The balloon was to show the universe that I wasn't going to give up. And the universe conspired for us to find each other. James smiled. So the balloon really did work. It did. And you know what else? What? Now I understand why people laughed when they saw me with that balloon on the roof. Why? Because they didn't believe in 50-year promises. They didn't believe that true love withstands time. And does it? It does. We are the proof. The sun set completely, and they went inside. Their home. Small, simple, but finally complete. 6 months later, James had an idea. Faith, would you like to go with me to Cleveland? What for? I want to show you the places where I lived when I was away from you. I want you to know my complete story. They made the trip together, visited the factory where he had worked, the house where he had rented a room, the streets he walked when he thought of his family. This is where I would imagine how you all were doing, he said, standing in a small square. How many times I thought about catching a bus and coming home. Why didn't you? Fear, pride, shame, all the feelings that made me lose 50 years by your side. James, stop blaming yourself. What matters is that we're together now. On the way back from the trip, they passed through Greenfield and visited the house where he had lived alone for so many years. This is where I wrote letters to Emmanuel, James shared. I always talked about you, but I never had the courage to send news directly. Why didn't you? Because I thought you had already forgotten me, that it would be selfish of me to want to come back after so long. Faith hugged him right there, in front of the house where he had suffered alone for so long. Promise me something? What? Promise me you'll never make decisions for me again. If you ever have problems, tell me. Let me choose whether I want to stand by you or not. I promise. And promise that if I'm ever sick or hard to handle, you won't leave again. I promise. And Faith? What? Thank you for tying that balloon on the roof. Without it, maybe we would never have found each other again. You're welcome, my love, you're welcome. 1 year after the reunion, they decided to move to a small house on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the old house, but it had a backyard where James could plant some vegetables and Faith could hang her clothes on the line. Helen visited more often, bringing the grandchildren who had fallen in love with their newly discovered grandfather. Grace continued living nearby, helping her parents when necessary but respecting the couple's privacy. On a wedding anniversary night, they had decided to celebrate the date of their vow renewal, not the original wedding. James gave Faith a special gift. What is it? She asked, opening the small box. Open it and see. It was a ring. Simple gold with an inscription inside, to Faith who never lost faith. James, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. You deserve all the beautiful things I couldn't give you during those 50 years. Faith put the ring on her finger and admired it. You know what the best gift you've ever given me is? What? Coming back. And do you know what the best gift you ever gave me is? What? Having waited for me. They kissed right there, in the small kitchen of the new house like a couple of sweethearts. 2 years after the reunion, James began to have more serious health problems. The back pains intensified. He had a few episodes of high blood pressure and needed to be hospitalized a few times. Faith cared for him with total dedication, as if she were making up for all the years she couldn't be by his side. Faith, you didn't sign a contract to be my nurse. Yes, I did. The day we renewed our vows. In sickness and in health, remember? That doesn't mean you have to give up your life to take care of me. James, my life is you. It always has been. One night he had a more serious episode and had to be taken to the hospital. In the emergency room, while waiting for the doctor, James held Faith's hand. If anything happens to me, nothing will happen. If it does, I want you to know that these 2 years by your side were worth the 50 we lost. James, stop talking nonsense. It's not nonsense. It's the truth. And I want you to keep living, to keep being the strong woman you've always been. I won't need to. You're going to get better. And he did. That time. But they both understood that time was running against them. James, do you regret anything? Asked Faith one afternoon as he rested on the sofa. I regret having wasted so much time. And you? I regret not having gone after you sooner. Why didn't you? because I was afraid to discover that you had really abandoned us. It was easier to believe in your return than to face rejection. I understand we were both cowards, each in our own way. But we were also brave, me for waiting, you for accepting to come back. True. On a Sunday morning, 3 years after the reunion, James woke up weaker than usual. Faith sensed something was different, but he asked her not to call the doctor. I want to spend this day at home, with you. They spent the day talking, remembering, planning the years ahead. James was tired, but he was happy. At night, when they went to bed, he hugged her tighter than usual. Faith? Yes? Thank you for tying that balloon. Why are you talking as if you were saying goodbye? Because we never know what tomorrow holds, and I want to be sure you know how grateful I am. I know, James. I always knew. The next morning, James did not wake up. He slept in peace, beside the woman who had waited for him for half a century. Faith held his hand for a few minutes in silence, as if she wanted to keep that moment forever. Then she called Grace. Daughter, your father is gone. What do you mean, Mom? He went to sleep and didn't wake up. Grace arrived at the apartment and found her mother sitting beside the bed, still holding her father's hand. Mom, are you okay? I am at peace. What do you mean at peace? Because he came back. Because we kept the promise. Because we had 3 years together in the end. The funeral was simple but full of love. Helen came with the grandchildren. Lucy came from Denver. The neighbors from the building attended. The priest who had officiated the renewal of vows held an emotional ceremony. James Henderson was a man who made mistakes like all of us, said the priest. But he was also a man who had the courage to come back, to ask for forgiveness, to start over. And Faith was a woman who showed that true love has no expiration date. During the wake, many people asked Faith how she managed to wait so long. Faith, did you never doubt? I doubted many times, but I always came back to believing. How? Because I knew the man I married. And I knew that if he were alive and could come back, he would. And what if he had died decades ago? Would you have waited your whole life in vain? No, because the time I waited wasn't wasted. It was time invested in love. And love is never in vain. After the funeral, Grace was worried about her mother's emotional state. Mom, how are you feeling? Sad, of course, but not devastated. Why not devastated? Because I had 50 years to prepare for the possibility of losing him, and because we had 3 beautiful years together at the end. Do you regret waiting so long? Never. If I could go back in time, I'd do everything the same, including tying that balloon to the roof. Helen stayed a few days taking care of her mother, but soon realized Faith was handling the situation well. Mom, would you like to come live in Chicago with me? No, dear. My place is here. It's where we built our new life together. But you'll be alone. I won't be alone, I'll be with the memories. And this time, they are complete memories, with a beginning, middle, and end. 6 months after James's departure, Faith received an unexpected visit. It was a journalist from a national magazine who had heard about the balloon story and wanted to write a feature. Mrs. Faith, would you mind telling your story to our readers? What would that be for? To show people that true love still exists, that it's worth waiting, worth fighting, worth believing. Faith agreed, and the feature was published with the title, The Balloon That Brought Love Back. The story had a big impact, and Faith began receiving letters from people all over the country. One letter was from a 60-year-old woman who hadn't heard from her husband in 15 years and was thinking of giving up the search. Your story gave me strength to keep trying, she wrote. Another was from a man who had abandoned his family 20 years ago and was afraid to return. Do you think it's too late for me to ask for forgiveness? He asked. Faith answered every letter, always with the same message. It's never too late for love, never too late to start over, never too late to be brave. A year later, she decided to turn her experience into something bigger. With Grace's help, she created a support group for people in similar situations. Abandoned wives, remorseful husbands, children who didn't know their parents, families separated by misunderstandings. The group met once a week in the parish hall of the neighborhood church. Faith shared her story and listened to the stories of others. Mrs. Faith, How did you keep hope for so long? Asked a 30-year-old woman who hadn't heard from her father in 10 years. I didn't keep hope every single day, Faith would answer. There were days I wanted to give up, but I always tried again the next day. And what if we never find the answers we're looking for? Then at least we know we tried, and that's already worth a lot. The group grew and began helping many people. Some managed to reunite with lost relatives. Others found peace to move forward. Everyone found support and understanding. 2 years after James's departure, Faith received a visit from a 20-year-old young man who had heard about the group. Mrs. Faith, my name is Gabriel. I'm the grandson of Mr. Emmanuel, the one who was friends with your husband. Gabriel, how wonderful to meet you. My grandmother told me you were there looking for information about your James, and she told me the whole story. And how is your grandmother? She's well, but she sent me here to give you something. Gabriel took a yellowed envelope from his backpack. It's a letter from my grandfather to your James, a letter that was never sent because he passed away before he could. Faith carefully opened the envelope. The letter was from 2010, a few months before Emmanuel died. James, my friend, I hope this letter finds you well. I don't know if you're still at the same address, but I need to tell you something important. The other day, passing through your hometown, I happened to learn that your wife still lives in the same house where you lived together. Still single, still waiting for you. James, maybe it's time to swallow your pride and come home. Life is too short to waste true love. If you receive this letter and are still alive, don't waste any more time. Go after your family, warmly from the friend who always believed in your love, Emmanuel. Faith finished reading the letter with tears in her eyes. Do you know what's saddest about all this, Gabriel? What, Mrs. Faith? It's that if this letter had reached James's hands, he would have come home in 2010. We would have had more years together. Does that make you sad? A little, but it also makes me happy. Why happy? Because this letter confirms that he really loved me, that the wait wasn't in vain. Gabriel visited Faith several times after that day. He became a sort of adopted grandson, helping with shopping, small repairs around the house, and keeping her company at doctor's appointments. Gabriel, why do you care so much about me? You didn't even know me before. Because my grandfather always said that your James was the best man he ever knew. He said his love for you was the purest he had ever seen, even though he abandoned the family. Precisely because of that. Because only someone who truly loves suffers so much from being away. On her 77th birthday, 5 years after the reunion with James and 2 after his passing, Faith had a simple party at home. Present were Grace, Helen with her family, Gabriel, some people from the support group and close neighbors. Mrs. Faith, make a wish before blowing out the candles, said one of the friends from the group. I don't need to make wishes anymore, Faith replied. I've already received everything I wanted from life. How so? I wanted my husband to come back. He came back. I wanted to spend my last years by his side. I did. I wanted to understand why he had left. I understood. I wanted to forgive and be forgiven. It happened. I have nothing left to ask for. So, what do you wish for the future? That other people have the courage I had to wait and the courage he had to return. That night, after everyone had left, Faith sat on the porch to admire the stars, as she had done every night since James had passed. James, she whispered to the sky, if you're out there somewhere, I want you to know I regret nothing. Not the 50 years of waiting, not the 3 years together, not the longing I feel now. A shooting star crossed the sky at that moment, and Faith smiled. Thank you for the sign, she said. Now I know you're well. The next day, she woke up with a new idea. She decided to write a book telling her complete story. She didn't know if anyone would be interested in publishing it, but she wanted it recorded for future generations that true love still exists. Grace, will you help me write a book? About what, Mother? About the balloon, about the wait, about the love that withstands time. Do you think people will be interested? I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. They spent the following months working together on the book. Faith dictated the memories. Grace typed and organized. Helen helped with proofreading when she came to visit. The book was finished a year later, and to everyone's surprise, a small publisher was interested in publishing it. The Balloon of Hope was launched at a simple evening at the town's public library. "Mrs. Faith, what is the main message you want to convey with this book?" asked a journalist present at the launch. "That it's worth believing in love, that it's worth waiting for the right one, and that it's never too late to start over. Would you recommend others do what you did? Wait decades for someone? I wouldn't recommend anyone do the same as I did. Every story is unique, but I would recommend everyone believe in the power of true love." The book didn't become a bestseller, but it had good regional sales and reached the hands of many people who needed a word of hope. Faith continued with the support group, continued answering letters, continued visiting people going through situations similar to hers. On one of these visits, she met an elderly couple who were divorcing after 40 years of marriage. "We can't understand each other anymore," said the woman. "We just fight." "Why did you get married?" asked Faith. "Because we loved each other." "And do you still love each other?" The couple looked at each other in silence. "I think so," replied the man. "Then the problem isn't a lack of love, it's a lack of patience with differences." Faith spent the afternoon talking with them, telling her story, showing that mature love is different from young love, but can be equally deep. "The difference," she explained, "is that when we are young, we want to change the other person to be like us. When we mature, we learn to accept differences." The couple decided to try one more time, and 6 months later they sent a letter to Faith saying they were doing well and grateful for the advice. On her 80th birthday, Faith received a special surprise. Gabriel, who was now 25 and had graduated in journalism, organized an event in the city to honor her. "Mrs. Faith, you have become a symbol of hope for many people," he said during his speech. "Your story shows that it's worth believing, it's worth waiting, it's worth fighting for love." Hundreds of people attended the event. Many of them had been helped by the support group or inspired by the balloon story. "Mrs. Faith," said a middle-aged woman, "because of your story, I decided to look for my son, whom I haven't seen for 15 years. I found him, and now we are a family again." "Mrs. Faith," said an elderly man, "your story gave me the courage to return home after 20 years running from responsibility. My wife forgave me, and now we are rebuilding our life together." Story after story of people who had been touched by the courage of a woman who tied a balloon to the roof because she believed in love. At the end of the event, they asked Faith what her greatest wish for the future was. "My greatest wish is that people don't give up on love easily, that they have patience, that they have hope, that they have courage. And for you personally. For me, I just want to continue being useful as long as God gives me health. And when my time comes, I want to find my James on the other side and tell him how our daughters became wonderful women, how our grandchildren grew up, how our story helped other people." 2 years later, at 82, Faith began to feel her energy waning. It wasn't anything specific, just the natural tiredness of age. "Grace, I don't think I can continue with the support group for much longer." "Why not, Mom? You're well." "I am well, but I'm tired. And I want to enjoy my final years more peacefully." "Final years, Mom, you could live another 20 years. Maybe. But maybe not. And I want to be prepared." Faith began to organize her things, to set aside items to donate, to write letters to important people in her life. One of the letters was for Gabriel. "Dear Gabriel, you have become the grandson I never had. Thank you for all the affection and care. Continue being this wonderful person and continue believing in love." Another was for the people in the support group. "Dear friends, you gave me purpose in my final years. Keep supporting each other. Keep believing that love is worth fighting for." A special letter was for Helen and Grace. "My dear daughters, you are my greatest pride. You knew how to forgive your father and accept that parents also make mistakes. Always take care of each other and remember that family is the most precious thing we have." On a spring morning, 3 years after turning 80, Faith woke up feeling different. It wasn't pain, it was a feeling of completeness, as if her mission on earth was coming to an end. She got up, had her breakfast, watered the plants on the porch, and sat in her favorite chair to admire the garden. "James," she whispered to the sky, "I think the time is coming for us to meet again." Grace arrived for lunch, as she did every day, and found her mother sleeping peacefully in the chair, with a serene smile on her face. "Mother?" she called softly. But Faith had passed on to reunite with James after a whole life dedicated to love and hope. The funeral was as well attended as her 80th birthday had been. People from various cities came to say goodbye to the woman who had become a symbol of perseverance and faith in love. Gabriel gave the main speech. Faith Henderson taught us that loving is not easy, but it's worth it, that waiting is not comfortable, but sometimes it's necessary, that forgiving is not simple, but it is liberating. She lived each day of her life as an act of faith in true love. During the wake, a young journalist asked Grace, "What do you think your mother would want people to remember about her?" That she tied a balloon to the roof because she believed in the impossible, and that the impossible happened. And what is the main lesson from your mother's story? That it's worth believing in love, always. 6 months after Faith's passing, the house where she lived became the headquarters of a non-profit organization focused on reuniting separated families. The organization's name, Balloon of Hope Institute. Gabriel, now a college graduate with experience in journalism, became the institute's coordinator. Helen and Grace participated as volunteer advisors. "Do you think Mrs. Faith would be proud?" asked Gabriel during the inauguration. "She would," replied Grace, "because her dream was always for other people to have the same chance she had." The institute thrived, and in 5 years of operation, helped hundreds of families reunite. Fathers who had abandoned children and wanted to ask for forgiveness, children searching for missing parents, couples separated by misunderstandings, siblings who had lost touch after family fights. The story of the balloon continued to inspire people long after Faith's passing. The book was reprinted several times, translated into other languages, and adapted for the theatre. But the true legacy was not in the books or the plays. It was in the lives transformed by the courage of a woman who refused to give up on love. On one of the Institute's walls, there was a framed phrase written by Faith herself shortly before she passed. "True love has no expiration date. It may take 50 years to come true, but when it does, every day of waiting is worth it." And just below, a photo of her and James on the day they renewed their vows, smiling like two young lovers who had just discovered love. The story of the balloon that brought love back became a legend in the region. Parents told it to children, grandparents told it to grandchildren, teachers told it to students. And whenever someone asked if it was true, if a person could really wait 50 years for love, the answer came with a smile. Ask the wind. It still remembers Mrs. Faith's balloon. End of story. And you? What did you think of this story of love and perseverance? Do you believe it's possible to keep faith alive even after so much time? Share in the comments which part moved you the most, and if you know any similar story. If this narrative touched your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one. Your interaction is very important for us to continue bringing content that truly makes a difference. Thank you for joining us on this journey.